my creative self as a composer, what I truly do want to do is marry the two. I want to marry classical music with pop music. And I want that to be a thing. I want students to be able to understand classical form, but be able to just feel and play and connect with the popular rhythms.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. All right, and now on to my next guest, composer Anthony Barfield. Hi, Anthony.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. Anthony, so I had an opportunity to meet you this past Monday at Indiana University, and I heard the rehearsal of your Heritage Concerto performed by DeMondre Thurman and the IU Wind Ensemble. You and I had talked, and we talked about doing an interview for the podcast, and I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, for sure.
So, Anthony, can you introduce yourself for the listeners? Tell them what you're doing and kind of where you live and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Anthony Barfield. I live in New York City with my wife, Elena, who's a trombone player in the West Point Band, as well as my little black pug, Gouda. So we're enjoying living here. I've been here in the city for 14 years this year. I run a production company, music production company called Velocity Music, which mainly focus on music production for the corporate world as well as the entertainment industry, with a little bit of focus on things such as film scoring and things like that.
Awesome. Now, Anthony, what's your instrument? So
I originally started off as a trombone player. It's been about 6 years since I put the instrument down, which is, now that I think about it, it's kind of a little strange because, I spent my life from, I think, about 14 to 15 years old, all the way until the age of 28 when I put the horn down. Between playing the trombone, all throughout, middle school, high school, college years at University of Alabama, Juilliard, Manhattan School, and a little bit of doctor studies at Stony Brook, spending all of that time and energy, practicing the instrument, trying to hone the craft. One would think that, it would stick with me forever, but I sort of used it as a way to sort of get me connected in the way that I am musically, to be able to work with, a lot of different conductors or work with people in the entertainment industry.
Mm-hmm. And so, Anthony, can you tell me about your band experience? I know you grew up in Mississippi. Can you tell me about your band experience and how that sort of led to, or the moment when you thought, well, gee, I want to be in music, and kind of how that came to be? Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I'll start with, you mentioned the Mississippi thing. So I am originally from Mississippi. I grew up on a large farm. We have currently over 500 acres in the family. Cows, ponds, a lot of hunting. Actually, down there when I was growing up, we called it deer hunting. Uh-huh. A lot of hard work. The uncles and my father, they're all carpenters and things like that. So, the way that I grew up sort of called for having experience for building things, building on the people's homes, building fences and barns and things like that. So I'd say that specifically sort of tied into the compositional aspect of what I do, and the need internally to want to structure something musically like that of building a home. But I'd say in addition to that, I think the moment that I knew that I wanted to make a career out of it was actually a moment that I think it was an unconscious decision rather than a conscious decision. So my mom, who was not a professional musician, she had a tendency to point out the melody from the music from film scores. Like I specifically remember there was a horror film from I think the 80s called Polar Express or something like that, where the music would be like ba-da-dee-dum, ba-da-dee-dum, etc. I mean, every time it would come on, my mom would like, oh, listen to that melody. And it just kind of sort of got into my skin of what melodies sound like and how that is actually attached to what's happening on the screen. And then in addition to that, my dad actually worked night shift. So my mom, would drive me and my sister to school. And on the way to school in the morning, we would all sing gospel hymns, but in trios. So, I was probably, 7, 8 years old, singing trios in the car with my family and just getting a ton of ear training experience. Of course, at the time, I didn't know that I was gaining that knowledge, but I think that's something that is just truly invaluable for musical development. So once again, between the film scoring as well as the trios, that sort of made like an unconscious decision to want to pursue music professionally. And then when I got to middle school band and started playing the trombone, it just sort of became just a no-brainer because at that point the music was just sort of, I'll say, to use the word, oozing out of my soul.
So Anthony, you and I talked a little bit about your background, and I'm curious about how your high school band experience translated to you going on to college and then eventually to Juilliard, and then where that took you next. And that's a little bit later in the interview, we're going to spend a lot of time about that. So can you tell me about your high school band experience?
Absolutely. My high school band, I'll say the whole band experience, throughout school was really amazing. From starting out being probably the last trombonist in the section in the high school band, all the way to working my way up to being first year. Some fond memories were from going to concert band and marching band competitions and just being on the stage or being on the marching field and giving your all in terms of the musical aspects and your technical abilities, and then just feeling what it felt like to have people applaud and feeling that that connection to the audience members was really, really, really incredible. But all in all, I'd say even more so than having experiences with concert band and marching competitions, some of my best experiences was going to honor bands around Mississippi and meeting new people, hearing musicians that could play circles around me, which was really, 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 really definitely a huge learning experience. But then after that, coming home and then having people, teachers, colleagues, the school principals giving me a pat on the back for the work that I did at these honor bands. In high school, I felt that there were not really a lot of African Americans or black people playing in the concert band and marching band. So I didn't really have that much of an example to sort of follow. Most of the Black people, the Black boys specifically, were, on the football team, on the basketball team, what have you. And because of this, I sort of had to sort of find my own path to gain confidence within myself, and having the school principals announce over the intercom in the morning, Anthony, congratulations, Anthony Barfield, for going to, the Delta State Honor Band and getting whatever chair in the ensemble. Congratulations, and having people acknowledge that was really incredible for, just my self-confidence. At one as a musician, but also again, sort of being a Black guy, in a group that at that time was thought of for Black guys being sort of a little bit not as macho, if you will.
So Anthony, tell me about the directors in high school that sort of pushed you to those honor bands and those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I will say about growing up in Collinsville, Mississippi, and going to high school in Philadelphia, Mississippi, is that there were not any private trombone teachers around for miles. I mean, in fact, I didn't even know that was a thing until I got to college. So I'd say my band directors 100% were the reason that I became a better musician, and specifically in terms of just this all around musicianship, but not as much in terms of the technical part of playing trombone. But I'd say some of my best memories, if you will, the first thing I'll say was my 6th grade band director, Mr. Scott Sullender, started to notice that I sort of would hear things a little bit different than a lot of the other students. And the reason why, I'll actually say, is when I was in, I believe, the 4th or 5th grade, I needed to wear glasses. And I was a pretty rough kid, by playing sports, with my cousins and friends and stuff like that. And so because of that, she purchased a pair of plastic glasses. Now, the thing about it is that around that time, the TV show Family Matters was very, very, very well known. And me being a little skinny Black kid wearing plastic glasses,
sure,
I was afraid that I was going to get made fun of to be thought of looking like Steve Urkel.
Right. Yep.
So what I would do was, if my mom, wouldn't drive us to school, I'd get on the bus and, I put my glasses on in the morning, but when I got on the bus, I would take my glasses off for the day. And so by the time I got to band, 6th grade band, what have you, I would look at the music really close at first. Once we play it through a couple of times, I would have it memorized. And by that point, because once again, I couldn't physically see the music, by that point, I would actually play my part, and then I would listen. I would actually listen to what was happening around me, what the trumpet players were playing, what the French horn players were playing, percussion, etc. And it got to the point where rather than playing my own part, I would start playing their part in addition to my part. It's sort of like a little bit of a fun exercise. But my band director, Scott Sullender, when he saw this, he actually called me into his office along with the middle school band director as well as the high school band director. And I remember them, they didn't say anything, they just called me in and were like, "Hey, Anthony, I have this keyboard here. I'm just going to play a couple of notes. I don't want you to look, but I'm going to play a couple of notes and I want you to just tell me what those notes are." And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, what's going on? Sure, I'll do it. And so they started to play notes, and I started to tell them what those notes were. And I remember they were all looking at each other like, wow, like what is this, And then Mr. Sullender told me I had a thing called perfect pitch, which, once I found out that that's actually what it was sort of, oh, okay, so that's what it is. I'm not actually going crazy. because I always thought it was just sort of a normal thing, you know. And then I'll say the second experience musically that sort of shaped my my want and need to learn more was my middle school band director, Carrie Eldridge. He actually noticed that I had no idea how to play dotted 16th notes. Once again, it was a situation where, I couldn't see the music. Now, granted, I could feel how to play the dotted 16th note. But then when we got to the point where we had to do sight reading for auditions or things like that, I had no clue how to play a dotted 16th. And I remember him bringing me into his office and, sitting me down and, asking me how to play this. I couldn't do it to save my life. And he took the time to teach me how. And I feel like that, that specifically are those types of moments were really just really key to sort of one feeling like I didn't have to be ashamed for not knowing how to play something. All I had to do, if I didn't know, was to ask someone who was in charge how to do it. And then I'd say the third biggest thing that shaped my career, my musical experience in high school band was an experience with my high school band director, Mr. John Weems. John Weems was a conductor who was, I think he was a musician, a clarinet player in one of the Army bands. But I remember when he came in to conduct, everybody thought, wow, this guy is such a hard ass. Like, he's a really strict guy. But for some reason, I took a liking to him and he took a liking to me. And when I was in the ninth grade, once again, I'm by this point, I'm, the first chair trombone, in the marching band and concert band. And I'm thinking that, I sound pretty good. However, I think he wanted to teach me a little bit of a lesson without actually saying anything. So him and his wife actually drove me to audition for the Mississippi Lions All-State Band, which is the premier honor band for the state of Mississippi. And I remember going to this audition and just once again hearing people play circles around me. It was really insane. It was definitely a reality check. Of course, I didn't get into the group that year, but it sort of lit a spark under me to come home and practice. And I remember coming home, and for the rest of that year, I just practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced, either where I had been at school, going home, playing for my cows, things like that, allowed me to get better. And then my 10th grade year is when I actually got accepted into the Lions Band.
What took you from high school to the University of Alabama and then eventually on to Juilliard?
Yeah. So what happened is, I'm not sure about, in today's society, in terms of being exposed to the options of schools that are out there, especially while living in a small town. But for me, growing up in Collinsville and Philadelphia, Mississippi, I had no idea that a place like Juilliard existed. I had no idea that New England Conservatory, et cetera, existed. All of my family members would either go to the small community college that was nearby, or they would go to Mississippi State University. So, from my senior year, I just thought, okay, I'm just going to go to East Central Community College, and that was it. I didn't think anything else of it. So I went there for a year, and I remember, they had this thing. It was just like a Friday. Every Friday they had a recital class, and you could just sign up and play whatever you wanted to. And I literally signed up and played on every single one of those classes. And I remember there was a voice teacher on the faculty that came up to me after one of the performances, and he just asked. He said, "Anthony, why are you here? And I said, I mean, I'm here because I want to be. You know, this is where my family, you know, has went. And at that point, he, you know, took me to his office, and it was kind of a tricky situation because he didn't necessarily want people to find out that he was informing me about these other universities, because, you know, that's not something that he's supposed to do. But he actually went to Boston University and told me about schools like that, as well as New England Conservatory. So once I found out about those schools, I actually went up, you know, to Boston and took a lesson with a guy up there who taught at Boston Conservatory and New England Conservatory, and auditioned for you know, Boston Conservatory specifically, and got in, but I didn't, you know, have enough money to go. So once I had saw that I was good enough to get into a conservatory, that sort of led me, you know, down a path to, you know, see what else is out there. And then I heard about University of Alabama, auditioned and got in. So once I got to Alabama, you know, it was really, really amazing experience, of course, meeting Demondre Thurman, who, you know, I wrote my euphonium concerto for, and studying with my former trombone teacher, Dan Drill. But the I'll say the biggest shift in my playing and in my way of thinking in terms of trombone playing musicianship was when I started taking unofficial lessons with Jay Evans, who is the principal trombonist of the Alabama Symphony Orchestra. When I started taking lessons with Jay, I quickly found out that he studied the trombone some in New York City. Of course, you know, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, New York City, what the hell? Like, you studied in New York City? And he said, yeah, I studied with the guy by the name of Joseph Alessi. Of course, I didn't know who Joseph Alessi was. And he mentioned the Juilliard thing. So I started researching Joseph Alessi and Juilliard. Of course, blown away. You know, for you listeners who may or may not know who Joseph Alessi is, I urge you to listen to him. Just insane player, trombone teacher. So from there, I had the brilliant idea that I wanted to take a lesson with Joe. I got his information, email, and phone number from Jay Evans, and I called and called and emailed and called for I'd say literally about 3 or 4 months. No response. And I remember the day. Actually, it was an evening. I told myself, okay, this is the last time that I'm going to try to call. If he doesn't pick up, I'm done. I'm not gonna do it anymore. I called and he picked up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Mr. Alessi, you know, just my heartbeat was just so rapidly beating. I remember being so nervous, but I'll say that phone call was sort of the beginning of you know, the a life-changing experience for me. So he invited me up to New York for a lesson. He just told me to come up. You know, he gave me a day, but he didn't give me a time. So up until this point, every summer, when I was at the University of Alabama, both at East Central Community College as well as University of Alabama, I would actually work during the summer. Never went to a music festival. I would just work during the summer. And so whenever he invited me up for the lesson, I said I would come up here and stay with my aunt and uncle over in New Jersey, in Trenton, New Jersey. So I came here, or came to the East Coast, worked. I think I had a grocery store job, and I came over here scared as all ever. Taxis blowing your horns everywhere, and bright lights and et cetera. But I remember that just it being so exciting. So I went over to Juilliard, waited for Joe, met him. He introduced himself, but he didn't really talk at all. We got in the elevator, rode up to the third floor where the dance studios were. Once again, never said anything to me. And when we got inside of the space, he said, "Oh, okay, I'm gonna let you warm up now." and he just walked out. So I started warming up, doing my thing. He came back in. I played a Rochu down, and I remember at the end when I finished my final note of the Rochu, he came up close to me and he was just like, "What was your name again?" So I think my playing definitely sort of sparked a little bit of an interest for him. And he invited me back for another lesson, which I ended up taking down in Georgia at Emory University when he was down there. And at that lesson, he said, that there was going to be a person graduating, that I should audition, and the rest is history. I auditioned and got in, and then there you go.
I love that story, and I love the fact that you had the courage to kind of reach out to Joe Alessi. And for those who don't know, you kind of pointed them direction, but there are very few musicians in this world who we consider the best, undisputed, and he might be one of them. I mean, might be the greatest trombone player in the world.
I mean, there are a lot of great musicians, of course, great trombone players that are out there. Christian Lindbergh being one, and Wyclef Gordon, of course, in the jazz world. But
sure.
But in terms of sort of the orchestral world, and and of course, playing solos and stuff like that. But in terms of just his sound and the consistency that he has for playing, it's just bar none. I remember one of the things that even though I don't play the instrument anymore, I'd say the most valuable piece of information that I got from him was how to pay attention to the details. And that's one thing that he's a huge advocate of. I remember lessons where if I would have hangups in my playing, we would work on that thing over and over and over and over and over until it was better. And his thing was, if you have literally any hangups in your playing, don't wait on them. You have to work on things that's gonna fix them. I think that's something that we all fell on, in some way, or another, students and what have you. That if you have a thing in your playing that is tough, it's hard to sort of take the time to just go to the problem, because at least from personally speaking, I remember even before I got to Juilliard, I remember having issues where I could not play. Like, I could start on a high note, but I couldn't play a passage from the high register down to the low register. Like Bluebells of Scotland. I'm not sure if you guys know this, but it's just stuff like beep, boop, 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 like that kind of things. Like those type of passages was horrible for me. And I remember wanting to work on this, but for me, the only time that I would actually work on these issues when there was no one around, because I was afraid that my colleagues, my peers, would actually judge me for sounding bad in the practice room, which is kind of interesting, right? Because you think of the practice room as a practice room. It's a place that you go to get better. But then when you're in music school, there's a little bit of a competition that's happening between you and your colleagues, that you don't want to seem like that person that is that's sounding horrible in the practice room. But once again, sort of that attention to detail is sort of transition over to everything else that I do musically. It's really incredible, really incredible technique.
All right, Anthony, let's talk about your music that you've written. So when did you begin composing seriously?
Yeah, so I started composing seriously in 2007. And I was composing here and there, throughout my college studies. But when I got to Juilliard, I wrote a piece for a high school friend of mine that was killed in the war in Afghanistan. It was just such a sad time that I wrote this elegy. And I had one of my colleagues, Christopher Reeves, who was now the one of the trombone players in the Marine band. I had him perform it, and he was obviously playing it in lessons with Joe Alessi, and Joe had no idea that I was a composer as well. So I remember going to the dress rehearsal, Christopher Reeves' dress rehearsal for his recital, and of course Joe was there. And when Joe finally heard the piece with piano accompaniment, he came up to me and was just like, "Wow, like I had no idea that you did this." And of course, I brushed it off. But then when the rehearsal was done, I went to the piano and started working on a piece that I was writing for a friend of mine who was a former trumpet player at the Manhattan School of Music. And I think I probably had maybe about 8 or 9 measures written of this piece. And all in the high register. And I played the thing on the piano, and Joe came up and was just like, "What is this? This sounds incredible. What is this?" And I said, "Oh, it's a piece, blah, 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 blah." And he said, I want you to finish this piece, and I want you to finish it for me, and it'll be a commission, and I'll perform it at the Alessi seminar. And I'm like, "What? What? You, Joe, are gonna perform my music? Okay." So I worked my ass off to make this happen, and that piece, funny enough, so I mentioned about it starting in the high register. I left it in that register because I knew that Joe would be able to play it. So that was 2007. He performed the piece Meditations of Sound and Light at the 2007 Alessi Seminar in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And after he performed it, the phone has literally never stopped ringing since. Just to have that, that type of a musician with not just the playing chops, the playing abilities, but the experience and the clout, if you will, behind him, just being principal trombonist of the New York Philharmonic, you name it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Having that type of a person give you that stamp of approval, everybody just sort of expected that I was, a composer. And when I started to get calls, I'm not going to lie, I was scared. I was really afraid, because that was officially the first full work, 3-movement concerto that I wrote. And funny enough, after I wrote the piece, it took me down the road to actually learn how to compose, because at that point, the experience of composing had purely came from just going back to playing in middle school band and hearing what all of these parts were doing, these components inside of a piece, and then going on to University of Alabama and playing in the wind ensemble with Gerald Welker, and having those experiences. And that's how I learned how to compose. So like I said, when the phone started ringing, I felt like, okay, I now need to really know how to do this. So I started, studying books and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so you have several band works of note. Several of them are concerti. Do you have any that are just solo band and not solo band alone?
Yeah. Well, to that note, I have sort of became the concerto guy, if you will, or the solo and ensemble guy for whatever reason. But I have 3 pieces that are out there that are just primarily for band. But funny enough, all 3 of them except for one, 2 of them were actually wrote for trombone choir and arranged to be for band. I'll say the first one that is out there is a piece is actually making a lot of rounds, which is amazing. Thank you, Dr. Rodney Dorsey, for making that happen. It's a piece called Here We Rest. That piece is about I think it's around 7 or 8 minutes long. All slow piece that was that I wrote for the Alessi Seminar Trombone Choir, originally for the Alessi Seminar Trombone Choir, but I wrote it and dedicated it to the victims of the there was a tornado that happened in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, that just was really devastating, and so I dedicated that to them. And then the second piece is I'd say it's about a probably grade 3 or 4, called "The Tree of Life." That piece hasn't actually been performed that much. I'm not gonna lie; it's probably not one of my better works. And then lastly, there's a recent piece that was transcribed from trombone choir, arranged from trombone choir to band, that is called Dreamcatcher. And that piece is one of the pieces that I'm going to start promoting pretty soon. That is definitely a grade 3-ish piece, with a slow, I think maybe 2.5 or so minutes of just slow material, and it goes into a fast driving sort of a situation. So
yeah, that's definitely in the wheelhouse of many listeners, is that grade 3. That's sort of a sweet spot.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the reason you first came to my attention, other than the fact that we have a mutual friend in Demondre, was I first heard him rehearsing your Heritage Concerto through the floor. In the summer, we shared an apartment building at a music festival while our wives play in the orchestra. And so I heard Demondre playing this piece, and he called me down and said, "Hey, I want you to listen to this new thing that Anthony Barfield wrote for me. It's called the Heritage Concerto." And so I first listened to this, and I've just been blown away and a fan of your music ever since I first heard this.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think this is a really special piece, probably because people I like are championing it. And can you tell me about the genesis of the Heritage Concerto and how that came about?
I first met Demondre Thurman in 2002 when I first got to the University of Alabama. I'm walking through the halls, and people are just saying, "Oh, have you met Demondre yet? Have you met Demondre? Have you met Demondre? Have you met Demondre?" And I'm like, "What's this Demondre Thurman? Who is this guy? And I found out that he was a former student there. Complete, pardon my French, badass. The guy just nailed literally everything he put his hands on, between euphonium playing, trombone playing, you name it. Just all around. Great musician, but, an amazing colleague. So I found out after that he was on the faculty at Alabama State University, which is an HBCU just up the street from Tuscaloosa. So I went there, had a lesson, which was incredible. And, that just started, a great friendship, colleagueship, mentorship, you name it. So we kept in touch for years. And then when I wrote Meditations for Joseph Alessi, he heard the piece and performed it. And I remember by that point when I went, I used to go down to visit quite often. And I was in his office. By this point, Demondre had taken over my former teacher, Dan Drill's job after he retired at the University of Alabama. So I went down and I was in Demondre's office, and we were talking about parts of the concerto. And, he said, "Oh, I like this part," or, I would do it this way a little bit different, but it's as great as it is, but this is how I would do it. And then I remember at the end of our conversation, he kind of mentioned, by passing, it's just like, "Oh, you're almost ready to write me a piece." And, at the time I thought, it was like, "Oh, well, is Demondre, is he cutting me up right now? Is he saying, oh, you're not good enough for me? Or is this sort of just a vote of confidence?" But, I just, kept writing, etc. And then I remember in 2000, this must have been 2011, I'll say. I remember I had just came back from playing. I think it was the 5th time or so I had played in the Malaysian Symphony Orchestra out in Kuala Lumpur, and I came back and I got a message from this guy by the name of Don Winston. Don Winston is a professional engineer in the city who took off, 20 odd years of playing. And, when he got to the point financially where he could, spend the time playing again, he started going to tuba and euphonium conferences. Of course, he met DeMondre, was blown away like the rest of us, and then wanted to start taking lessons again. Of course, DeMondre doesn't live in New York, so DeMondre put Don in contact with me. I started giving him lessons for a little while, and what I did not know is that Don and DeMondre were actually talking about commissioning me to write a work. And DeMondre, he said, I think Anthony's ready. And so Don commissioned, and then that's how that happened. I'll say that I think, out of all the pieces that I wrote, between, either for band or for, some solo instrument, corporate film score or whatever, this piece is probably the most special to me, mainly because of the title. I titled it Heritage. And it just sort of harkens back to our heritage as being African-American men who grew up in the South, where there were not a ton of resources and musically, what have you, financially, and then sort of making our way out of that. And that is sort of a very special unspoken thing that we have together. So yeah.
Yeah, when I listen to it, it's you talk about it being sort of based on ancient Egypt, but I hear spirituals in it. I hear hip hop in it. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, I have to say, when I started writing this piece, I think the one thing that I did not want to do was limit myself in terms of what I could write. Once again, and it had nothing to do with just, saying, oh, I want to make sure that, I can write a piece that's going to be hard enough for DeMondre to play, or I need to make it easy enough for everybody else to play. Nothing like that. But it was just sort of a situation where I felt like that this was sort of the first time that I literally could go just deep into my soul, into my musical conscious and unconscious, and just be. And so I just used classical form, but incorporated everything else musically in addition to classical music. So you're right. You hear, a lot of pop rhythms. You hear a lot of jazz and urban R&B chords. You also hear gospel chords, etc. With specifically in the second movement, there is a part towards the middle end where I take it back to church, and I have just, the ensemble is just kind of grooving, and, there's the tambourines happening with the bass drum and stuff. So like I said, I think, it was sort of the first time that I personally felt that I could do exactly what I wanted to do musically, because I knew that DeMondre would be able to achieve that type of, connection musically that I was, that I had in my head.
It's such a tremendous addition to the band repertoire and the band and euphonium, solo euphonium repertoire. And so really appreciate it. Yeah. So Anthony, one of the things that really intrigues me about you is that you are actually on a different career path now. I know you're still writing a little bit of music, but you do this audio production and this more, you mentioned it earlier, popular and commercial stuff. Can you talk about that and how you kind of got into that field?
So the type of music that I do, specifically, I'll say the entertainment industry, pop music production, urban music production, it kind of started back when I was 16 years old. So I have a cousin that used to be a music producer that lived in Georgia. And when he heard that his little cousin, was a trombone player, he thought, he should give me some of his production equipment. So
cool.
He gave me some nice monitors, speakers, gave me an 8-track virtual recorder, etc. And I had my own keyboard, but what I would do is I basically started making beats. I would just literally make beats. At 16 years old, I get out of school, come home, maybe practice a little bit, do homework, deal with the cows and what have you. And then I would start making beats all night until probably 3, 4 a.m., go to sleep, be tired as ever, in class. And I would just do that every single day. That continued all the way through my Juilliard studies, a little bit of Manhattan, or throughout Manhattan, Stony Brook, etc. But I never really talked about it that much. I would just make the beats and I would send them to some of my close friends. That only a few people knew that I did it, and they give me great feedback. But it was never a situation where, I sort of took it serious. But then I'll say the shift that happened was, after I'll say 6 or 7 years ago, when I put the trombone down for good. That took me into sort of more the compositional production route. And once again, I was composing for band, etc. But in addition to that, I was doing a lot of recording engineering. As a matter of fact, after my studies, I ended up going back to Juilliard and working as a recording engineer there for a couple of years. And once again, all the time, I kept making beats, etc. And then about 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, I was working another job on staff at Juilliard, and I just decided that it's time. I'm just going to go full force with the composition thing and music production thing. And eventually it got to the point where the pop music production sort of took over. Funny enough, I remember thinking, I think this is a thing that happens a lot with classically trained musicians or people who are trained in jazz or any type of high art musically. Usually what happened, in my experience, people will say that, pop music is very simple. There's nothing that's important about it, or there's nothing really special about it. And I kind of felt the same way for a while. I was like, oh my gosh, like there are literally only 4 chords in this particular track, or they're, in a trap track, a lot of the Atlanta type of style of music, there may be only 2 chords. But the shift that happened was I started to see that a couple things. One is that for me, the joy that I get in terms of the creation aspect of producing pop music, if you will, is the production of it, meaning what can I do inside of the software to make this track that only has 2 chords, make it sound like it's really amazing. And there are a ton of, plugins and, virtual instruments, etc., that will allow you to do that. And then the second shift is, keeping in mind that when I was studying classical music, much like every other classical musician, the majority of every other classical musician, when you're in school studying that art, you're immersed in that. I used to listen to the Mahler symphonies and this song, that Scriabin, Rachmaninoff, what have you, study scores. But I never really truly would, check out any pop music. Because once again, I thought that it was just, I'm above this. But the second thing that I figured out was, funny enough, is that the classical community are people who appreciate classical music. And the amount of people in the world that can actually sit down and listen to that is a small percentage of the amount of people who enjoy popular music. As a matter of fact, one of my colleagues, this piano player, sort of put it best. She said that, once again, there are different schools of thoughts on this, but she said that that usually people who are in high art, classical music, what have you, even visual art, sometimes they like to feel, quote unquote, feel the music or the art from the neck above, because the way they're feeling it is more or less through intellectualizing it. They want to understand what's going on. But then the rest of the world, people who don't know anything about music or art, the majority of times they want to feel from the neck down, like especially with music, they want to be able to move and groove. They want to be able to feel some sort of emotional aspect. And that, once again, that's not to say that classical, classical people, that's not to say that people who appreciate classical music don't feel it in their heart and their soul, but it's just a different way of feeling. So once I started to realize that as a creator, as a composer, I could reach a hell of a lot more people for what I do than I would in the classical music area. It was kind of a win-win situation. I mean, I would write a piece, for a wind ensemble. And, of course, I go to the performance and there would be maybe, a couple of hundred people in the audience, which is amazing. And it's nice to have, that sort of instant appreciation. But then since I've been in pop music, we put out a track and, on YouTube alone, have, 45 million YouTube views or whatever, so that the reach goes so much farther, which is kind of nice.
All right, Anthony. So as I listen to you talk, I'm struck by how your career has gone through such an amazing evolution. And I'm thinking about the band directors out there who have kids, and it's not really about white or black or color or culture or anything like that, about the kids who might be a little bit disaffected and might be looking to get into popular music, but their only outlet right now is the band. What can directors do to help nurture that talent and keep the kids involved in band music and also serve that other need for these kids have?
Yeah, I'd say first of all, Mark, that's a really excellent question. I think about it quite often, in terms of, how my career may have progressed even faster if I had have known that this was an option. Personally speaking, I think something that could really benefit students, like the type of students that you're talking about, is having band directors program music that may be a little bit outside of the box. Like one of the things that you and I talked about earlier is with my music, I have a tendency to incorporate a lot of those popular rhythms, etc. Whereby, if I listen to Granger, that's not to say that somebody, composer like Granger or even, Holst would not have rhythms in the piece that would be that you could feel and have a beat. But at the same time, a lot of those pieces were from a different time period. And so, programming pieces like some John Mackey works or, I'm not sure if Mason Bates is really a band guy, but, programming music that, once again, that sort of kids can relate to in today's society, today's musical society, is very important. In addition to that, I think, finding, I'm going to use myself for an example, and I know there are other people out there that are like me, finding composers like myself who are doing sort of a little bit of a crossover thing and bringing them in, to talk to the band, or if not bringing them in, just have them Skype and have the kids, well, first, being able to show the kids, what that, composer does, in terms of the music, and then have the kids just ask questions. And then lastly, I think if there's any way possible to demonstrate, to show the kids that something in terms of music technology is really important. I've done a few classes on the East Coast at different high schools where they would have as a class, they would actually have music production, like, where the teacher, teaches Logic Pro. And that's something that was, I saw that was really effective, because kind of what you're saying, the majority of these kids that were inside of this music production class, they were musicians. They were playing in a concert band, jazz band, etc. But whenever they took this class, they quickly saw that, wow, there actually is another way that I can create music without playing the instrument. And once again, because it is electronic music, quote unquote, making music inside of the computer, etc., they feel more of a connection with it, because it's kind of what they hear on the radio.
Yeah, no, I mean, as I ask a question of every guest, is the challenges facing music education, and overwhelming the response is staying relevant. And I think this is part of the thing. Mm-hmm. Trying to show kids that there's a connection between what we're doing in band, what we're trying to teach them in music, and the greater musical world that maybe they're more plugged into on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And but once again, like, even to the standpoint of, if, let's just say, if the conductor does not have access to, music software like Logic Pro or Cubase or something like that, I think even just, like, I've done things with kids where, I've just set up a recorder, and then, like a Zoom recorder, and just like have one person, beat out a rhythm on the table, and then have another person like take out their instrument and play, something that's going to fit into that vibe, and then just keep adding on things that's sort of a little bit more, like popular in terms of the rhythms and stuff like that, and then record it and play it back for them. And they feel more of a connection, because it's like, this is something that they've composed themselves, that's not necessarily, inside of a certain genre. It's just music. So things like that, at least in my experiences, kind of help.
All right, Anthony, you've been really generous with your time. Let me ask you some of the questions here at the end here. So where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
I haven't really thought about it that much, just thinking back through my career. If there was any competition, it was sort of more competition just within myself, to make sure that I can play the best that I can, or, compose the best piece that represents who I am as a person, but I will say, thinking of the composition thing, it is a little bit, it's easy to go down the competitive road, because, as a younger composer, you see people like John Mackey, who was just killing the game, and and then you think, oh, well, how can I do that? How can I catch up with him? But then at the same time, John Mackey is older than I am. He's lived longer. He's done he's composed a lot of more work than I have. When I thought about it from that perspective, it was easier to not think about it as a competition, but just rather as, okay, this is what he's done. Now let me get my ass to work.
So Anthony, you we had a little bit of a conversation about this, but musicians of all walks of life, especially teachers, they really struggle with work-life balance. And how do you find that? I know you're very busy.
I'm still trying to figure that out. I really am. I'm still trying to figure that out. The more in my head, the more successful that I become, the easier it is to find that work-life balance. Because, like, for example, when I first started Velocity Music as a company 2.5 years ago, it was very important to take every opportunity that came to just work as much as possible. And now that foundation is there, between the amount of work that we've done that we can leverage to get more work. Now that the foundation is there, I find that I can every now and then turn off the phone and spend time with the wife and the dog, and get things done around the house and, stuff like that. But all in all, I do find it very difficult, once again, specific of what I do, because, it's not a situation where, I have my, 8 to 4 or 9 to 5 job and I get off and that's it. Like for me, because, I'm responsible for the company, there are times where, I may be getting into bed with my wife and then just literally out of nowhere, I get 5 or 6 texts one from the manager, one from an artist, one from blah, 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 and they're all needing answers right now. So it's an ongoing battle. It is an ongoing battle, but I will say that, definitely the older I get, I've realized the benefits of, forced relaxation, if you will. Because, if you think about it, you could literally go your whole life and just never turn off and just, always work. And then, you're, 70 years old and you realize, wow, like I experienced no travel, or I didn't really spend enough time with my kids, or, what have you. So, it's an ongoing thing.
All right, Anthony. So I'm going to ask you this question because I really like it. And, if you could travel back in time to your high school graduation, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
I'd say to know your value. I think, I had a few many situations where, both as a trombonist as well as a composer, where, I was taken advantage of in the business. Because I really didn't understand my value, both being taken advantage of for, the amount of work that I put in. And then, in addition to that, the financial aspects of it, as a composer, and maybe this is sort of veering off a little bit, but I feel like it's necessary to speak about this. But as a composer, getting out of school and people asking, for a commission, what have you, and me not necessarily like them asking for a commission, but also asking what my fee is. And I would be afraid to talk about it, as well as if I would list a price, I would always, lowball myself. And it's okay to do that, in the beginning stages, especially if you don't really have the reputation yet or what have you. But after a while, you have to figure out how to be able to talk about those things, talk about your value financially, and still be nice about it. Because, people have to know that young Anthony Barfield isn't always going to be cheap, and that's okay. People, I think it's, at least for my experiences in music school. And funny enough, this was never really talked about. I think it was sort of an unspoken thing, is that, if you talk about making money in the business as a classical musician, if you talk about it too much, that's like a bad thing, because, it's all about the love and, et cetera. But I think the thing that is important that I didn't really think of is that, even though this is something that I love to do with my whole being, is what I love to do, I still have to make a living, and it's being a starving musician, it doesn't have to be that way, so to go back, to talk to my younger self, I probably would have just, said, know your value, man. Come on, get it together. Know your value.
Is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things, specifically with, I'll first say this. I do have, even though I haven't really wrote, specifically for band or for orchestra, and it's been a couple of years now, I'm negotiating a couple of projects that may or may not allow me to come back to the classical composition. I'll just leave it at that. So stay tuned, guys. You may hear, of a new Anthony Barfield piece coming out soon, a year from now. And then the second thing is, so my company, we signed a major deal, a record deal with a company that is part of Sony RCA Records. So we've been producing music for a lot of Sony artists right now, as well as the artists that are signed to this particular label. So that's a little bit of a good news, in terms of sort of the access now that we have to people like Khalid or Miley Cyrus or what have you. The access that we have to those people, which is pretty amazing. So we're working on a ton of things. One of our records that we did with Chris Brown is now double platinum, which means that it's sold over 2 million physical copies, and then I think it's maybe over 1 billion streams or something via Spotify. So a lot of good things have happened and are happening. So yeah,
man, sitting in a trombone class in Mississippi, and here you are. I mean, that's the point of this, right? That's what we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Anthony, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So, you can just email me, Velocity Music, VELOCITY music, NYC @gmail. Or you can literally send me a text. I don't have any problems giving out my number. In fact, I'll say that texting is probably a lot quicker to get in contact, as I'm on the move quite regularly. The phone number is 601-479-8955. You can also check me out on the company website, where you can go and check out Bandworks under the scoring tab. And that is www.velocitymusicnyc.com.
Awesome. Anthony, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Mark, thank you. Man, it's amazing. Thank you.